Hello everybody, my name is the Holy Apple and welcome to a new kind of video, or different kind of video shall I say. I'm basically going to be doing a Destiny 2 exotic tier list. So just as a side note, this is obviously going to be my opinion. You can have a different opinion, disagree with the weapons I put into different tiers, but I will also leave the link in the description should you want to try it yourself. But I'm just going to get straight into it. So the SOP is going to be S tier, whereas I have two special kind of categories, which is the fun guns and asking Banshee for refunds. You might understand where this goes when I put the weapons in there, but straight off the bat, I'm just basically going to go from left to right from down at the bottom of the list. So there is quite a few to get through. I don't remember all of them name-wise off the top of my head, but I can remember quite a few of them. So hopefully I'm not going to make a total mess of this, but we'll wait and see. We'll start with the Ace of Spades. I personally think PvE-wise, I don't see this being viable. PvP is definitely in the meta still. I think it would actually slot the in A rank, because it is a loved weapon after all, and it is still well within the meta for PvP at the minute. Anarchy, I feel bad for Anarchy. It used to be such a good tick weapon. It's not so much anymore against bosses. It's still good for ad clear, but not many people use it because they have plenty of other options to use their exotic slot for now. So, as much as I don't want to do this, I think I'll have to put Anarchy into C tier. It would be in A tier or maybe even S tier if it had its pre-nerf damage, but ever since that nerf damage for bosses, it's not anywhere near as good anymore. Alright, the Arbalest. So it is a little bit of an interesting one. The Arbalest is quite a good weapon, and at the same time it's also a fun gun for me, because I like using it to smash out ridiculous damage on shields. But the more important thing, I think I just have to go and put it in. I think it will join Anarchy and see. It has to. Next up, we have Bad Juju. Bad gun. Moving on. Black Talon. I know this is a bloody nightmare to deal with in PvP. I would probably put this in C tier, thinking about it. You'll have to forgive me. I can't remember the name of this sniper for the life of me. I'm sure I'll remember post-edit, but either way. No, this isn't. To me, this isn't very useful, so I'll have to, no, not into fun guns, drop it into D tier. Cerberus 1, the auto rifle, that's trash to me. Actually, second thought, no, that can stay in D tier. Coldheart, it can be quite fun in laser tag games. I'm actually going to put this in fun gun, because the only time I use Coldheart is if we're doing like Crucible game mode, momentum control, I think it is, where you just see loads of people running around with trace rifles. It's always a load of fun using things like Coldheart. Crimson. Right, this is an actual weird one for me because I personally don't like using it, but it always kills me in the Crucible, no matter what I do. If I ever come across one of these, it slaps me every time, without a doubt. But I'm not good with it. I will slot this at a C tier just because out of the respect. D.A.R.C.I, I don't think anybody really uses D.A.R.C.I, if I'm being honest with you. So this is going to be the first one where I say ask Banshee for a refund. Deathbringer, the old classical rocket launcher. So I'm actually quite keen on this one. So it's very good for PvE damage. You don't see it much really in things like Gambit and Crucible. I have seen it a couple times in Gambit, saying that though. All round, it's just quite a good rocket launcher. I think it's like one of the highest spec DPS weapons, like next to Galahorn. I'll put it in B tier. I don't think it's deserving of an A, because whilst it is a very good damage one, there are really good alternatives. Next up on the list, Divinity. It's definitely high up there. I'm going to have to put it that way, because let's face it, anybody who's experienced in the game of Destiny will know what Divinity is. And it's just its sheer like applications and what you can use it for in endgame PvE content. It has to be high ranking, because literally everybody knows of it. If you have it, somebody in the fire team is going to use it. So I think I'll have to give it the first S tier. Divinity has to be S tier. Eriana's Vow. I know this was kicking up a lot of drama in the Gambit kind of arenas recently. But like I'm going to disregard that. I'm just going to go straight for how like Eriana's Vow feels for me and what it actually does. I think it's like an anti-barrier hand cannon. Shoots really slow but does a lot of damage. I'm going to be honest, for me, Eriana's Vow I don't use ever. It's very rare that I'll use this for any kind of reason. I would actually have to put it. I'll put it in C tier. Feels a bit cruel putting it in D tier because I know it can be useful, but I just don't use it. Fighting Lion. This isn't actually that bad. Now that we've got unlimited ammo on Fighting Lion, this has turned from being a crap gun to fairly okay. Because like, it's only because of the unlimited ammo that it is that case, but even then I can't really put it in a tier. I can see more use for like the bad Juju and the Cerberus +1 than the fighting line, because there's a lot more exotics you can use in the exotic slot, and the primary slot probably has something that's going to do as much damage as this or better. So I will actually put this into the fun gun. Graviton Lance, I see memes about this bloody everywhere. It's the weirdest gun I've ever used as well, because I do appreciate the fact that you can have a little black hole when you kill something. So again, for me, this is going to have to go into the fun gun. Now, Hardlight. This is like the first weapon I ever got that was multi-changing elements. So this is a weird one for me. I have to think, like, originally it was quite good as a utility weapon, where if I needed to break multiple types of shields, this would be quite good. But now, with like the addition of adaptive munitions and the fact that you can just brute force through shields now, pretty much, it doesn't seem that necessary anymore. I think I'll have to chuck this into D tier, because I don't think I see anybody using it anymore, and the element rotating factor is now becoming more of a generalized thing rather than something you need. Izanagi's Burden, arguably the strongest sniper in the entire game. Obviously when it uses its ability, it becomes a much more powerful, and it pairs quite nicely with rocket launchers. I think I'll have to actually chuck Izanagi up at A tier. You wouldn't use it in PvP, but in PvE it is a godsend if you want to use sniper rifles. Jotunn, very controversial weapon, because a lot of console players will like Jotunn. PC hate it just simply for the fact that it's a cheap way to get kills in Crucible. In all honesty, I think this is kind of a fun gun to use. It's not good to be in the gradings because you don't use it outside anywhere except PvP. If you're using it in like end game stuff, I'm really questioning why you're using Jotunn. But if you use it, you can imagine like using it in strikes and things like that just to mess around. So it'll have to go into the fun gun category for me. The Monarque, so one of the strongest bows in the game at the moment, probably one of the most popular ones as well actually, because I remember seeing this in trials very recently. So I think the Monarque I'll have to throw into B tier, because that seems to be where the publicity stands. It's quite good in PvE, and it does slap quite a bit in PvP, so it's justifiable using it pretty much anyway. You wouldn't really use it for endgame PvE content, but generalized PvE is quite good. Legend of Acrius, I'll be honest, I have not seen a soul use this in my entire time playing this game. I don't even know like what this does, if I'm being completely honest. I think it's some kind of shotgun, if memory serves me right, like a forced shotgun. So I'm going to put in as Banshee for a refund, I don't even know. Leviathan's Breath, quite a popular bow. So again with the bows, this one I don't think it's going to actually be as popular as the Monarque, if I'm thinking about it, because while I see quite a fair bit of them around and its ability is really good, you can have other bows that do the same ability. So I think I'll have to put Leviathan's Breath in C tier, thinking about it. Lord of Wolves, basically the OG rapid fire shotgun. I don't see many people use it in, well, I don't see anybody use it in PvE, but PvP you'll see it from time to time. I personally I see this as a fun gun. I don't see this in a ranking because you don't see it often enough to judge it as an actual gun or compare it to others. So, Lord of Wolves, fun gun. Lumina, I've never seen anyone use this. I don't like its ability. I have no intention of using this hand cannon. Ask Banshee for a refund. So next up we have the Malfeasance, and if memory serves me right, Malfeasance has like a poison damage thing. Obviously with the addition of Striga now, it's not as unique as it used to be. But I still think this is quite a solid hand cannon for what it was. I am quite comfortable to put this in C tier actually. Merciless fusion rifle, again, this one has to go into the fun gun because it's a trace rifle. I only ever use trace rifles in momentum control, which it turns into laser tag. So, fun gun. Midas multi-tool, the OG scout rifle that everyone used to use in PvP, or so I hear. I personally have never used this gun because I've never had a need to use it. If I'm going to use a scout rifle for any reason whatsoever, I tend to just lean towards the legendaries because I'm not going to have a power weapon that's exotic rather than a legendary. So, honestly, for me, I'll have to put Mida at a D tier, and that's going to upset some people. But I don't use Mida at all. Monte Carlo, it is an auto rifle, and it has quite a nice ability to refresh your melee ability. I can see this being particularly useful for maybe Stasis Hunters, maybe in a Void Titan or Void Warlocks with their new, obviously, ranged abilities. Yeah, I can see me putting Monte Carlo in C tier. 1000 Voices, one of my favourite fusion rifles, especially with Season of the Lost last time when it had particle deconstruction. This thing was an absolute monster. I don't think I can put it into the same category as an utility for Ace of Spades and Izanagi. but I definitely think this can happily slot into B tier because it does a lot of damage regardless. It has a very dangerous side effect of you can blow yourself up very easily if you hit a wall, but I'm willing to overlook that and put it quite high on the list. Outbreak Perfected, this pulse rifle is pretty much coming in very clutch at the minute, especially in Valor the Disciple. So, for those who don't know, it is very useful in taking down the Caretaker, which is the first boss, technically. Just because of the sheer amount of range you need to cover, and the more of these that are being shot at Caretaker, the more the damage stacks. And this applies for any boss, by the way, so the nanites on this pulse rifle are quite powerful, and with the buff recently for pulse rifles, I don't see why not. But just because of the sheer utility of it, and the fact that we have an unstoppable mod for pulse rifles so far this season, I'm quite comfortable putting this in B tier as well, just because of the sheer utility of it. Polaris Lance, now the funny thing is I need this still to complete a collection. I still haven't got around to it because I see no use for this scout rifle at all. I could be wrong, but that's because I've never used it before. I've never had the intention to get it before. I don't think the ability on it, memory serves me right, isn't that good. So I think even if when I get around to buying this and completing the collection, I'm just going to ask Banshee for a refund. You'll have to forgive me because I've forgotten the name of this weapon, but I seem to remember that this is a choice rifle. I don't recall if it's solar or void though. So again, with the other two trace rifle that I put in prior, fun guns all the way. The Rat Kings. Now, I've never used the Rat King before, but I know it can be quite powerful, especially if you have an entire team running Rat Kings as well, because it basically buffs off each other in a fire team. So if you go into Control, for example, on Crucible, and you go 6 vs 6, if 6 of you are running Rat Kings, I guarantee you those Rat Kings are just going to absolutely rip through the entire team. I don't see this one being any kind of use in PvE, however, which is a shame, but it's how it is sometimes. I'm going to put this as a fun gun as well, because I don't think you'd actually use it for any other reason than to mess around. Risk Runner, basically the newbie's best friend. The first exotic that you should technically get at this point if you're playing post Beyond Light, because it's like the first exotic quest you get. And not to mention as well, it is still technically viable in like late game PvE content. Like the Fallen Saber Strike, for example, where you're running Legendary or maybe even Master, maybe even Grandmaster, and you can use Risk Runner and it works out quite well for you. So with that in mind, I will have to place this on C tier. It is a very good and viable submachine gun. Skyburner's Oath, and I weirdly remember the name of this just because I liked how it fired. It's definitely a lot different compared to other scout rifles, I suppose that you'd have to call this. It's not a scout rifle, but that's what it is described as. But unfortunately for the Skyburner's Oath, I don't actually have a lot of utility for it. I don't see this anywhere in PvP. I don't see anybody using it in PvE unless you're messing about, maybe. So this, unfortunately, I'll have to throw this into D tier. I don't see us using it at any point. Sleeper Simulant, the alternative to 1K voices, and the alternative that was actually easier to get than 1K voices if you didn't have a fire team of 6. So I can imagine a lot more people have this and was probably using this in Season of the Lost when we had Particle Deconstruction. And not only that, it is actually quite viable even in late game content. You won't obviously ever use this in PvP. If you are, you're a bloody nutcase. But in endgame PvE content, it's still very viable. So I'll have to put this into A rank along with these Izanagis. It is definitely up there as one of the best linear fusions you can use, even especially in late game. Next up we have Sturm. I'll be honest, I don't see this very much anymore, but I do see it in PvP every now and again. I personally don't think it's that good of a weapon, even if you do pair it with the alternative. I can't remember what its name is though, so please forgive me. But I don't see it as being a very good weapon. There's a lot more better alternatives you can use, so I'll have to put this into D tier. I wouldn't say it's trash and you have to refund it, but it's not that good to me. Sunshot. Again, I don't see this being that good when there are better alternatives out there. I don't see you really using it in a PvE environment either, so I'll again have to put this into D tier. Suros Regime, exactly the same thing. An auto rifle that's definitely ran out of luck. It will have to go into D tier as well. I don't see much utility for it anywhere. Now, Sweet Business, controversial one, because despite the fact that you wouldn't ever use this in PvP unless you're a lunatic, and the guy who's watching this video would definitely know who he is when I'm saying this. He is a nutcase. But in reality, in PvE, it's not so bad. When you're doing like low-end PvE content such as strikes, battlegrounds, maybe even the odd dungeon run here or there, Sweet Business is actually a fairly decent weapon for mowing down ads, albeit not the best weapon you can use, but it's definitely decent. So I think I'll have to put it into C rank, and also like as an added bonus to this as well. You can get sweet business very early on, so it's quite a good for a primary exotic weapon for new players. Next we have the Taraba. Now I know this is quite popular in PvP. In PvE I don't really see it much at all. I don't like it personally. I'm not entirely sure why. I just can't get on with Taraba. I have it, I've tried using it, I've really tried my best to like it. I've seen people shred with this gun. I just can't get on with it. But I think it's a happy middle ground. I will happily put this into C rank as well. It's one of them weapons where it's going to be good for you or it might not be good for you. It has quite a bit of a demanding cost for it though, with 240 red spoils. So considering that is an SMG and not something much bigger, then I'm quite surprised with the cost. Telesto! Ah, god, this thing, it breaks everything it touches apparently. I would love to actually like comment positively on Telesto, but the grand reality is I only ever see this gun as something that breaks the game over and over and over again. So with that in mind, I'm going to put it into B tier. Chaperone, I absolutely hate this gun in PvP. It's not so much that I hate using it, it's I hate the fact that everybody uses it against me, and I can't combat people with shotguns, or not very well anyway. So it is a good gun. You can get it quite early on. It's good for PvP. Sort of okay in PvE. I don't think you'd really complain about using it much. There are alternatives, obviously, if you're in PvE. But I definitely think Chaperone would definitely earn a spot easily in C tier if I was doing. Well, I am doing this, so you'll have to live with my decisions. Colony, I don't see anybody ever using this. The only time I've ever used it really was to mess about with it. So I think I'm gonna have to put this into fun gun category as well. You don't use it ever otherwise. Huckleberry, I know this was quite viable in both PvE and PvP, especially due to the fact that it basically has a perk that does subsistence on it. And considering this is an exotic SMG which doesn't run out of ammo, it's quite nice to tear through ads, even if they're running at you with like a straight line. So I want to put the Huckleberry in C tier as well, because I feel that's where it would belong. It's quite an average weapon in my eyes, but it's very good at what it does. Jade Rabbit, don't even ask me, just refund it to Banshee. Next we have the Last Word. Now I see a lot of people using this in PvP. I personally do not get on with it. I've tried using it numerous times. I can only ever see this ever being a plus if you're using a controller, if I'm being honest. PC, it's much harder to use. Credit to the people who can actually use Last Word properly using a keyboard and mouse. I can't personally do it. But for me, I have to throw this into D tier. I can't get on with it. Prospector, just refund it. I don't see any point for it. Queenbreaker, no viability at all. Again, ask Banshee for a refund on this one. Now, the Wardcliff Coil. An interesting weapon. I would say this is neither good nor bad, because in reality of it, it's actually fairly good in specific situations, but in every other situation you wouldn't use it just because it's so volatile and unpredictable. My case in point of this is where you got to do the VOG challenge where you got to kill 2 of the Gorgons. You would use a Wardcliff Coil because you get the bonus damage from vehicles, which Gorgons are technically vehicles apparently. So you'd use Wardcliff Coils in the entire team and you just melt them instantly. But in every other situation, like boss damages and everything like that, you just wouldn't use it because it's not sustained DPS. It's like one burst and it's done. But I personally think I'm going to put this into fun gun category because you would mostly use it just to mess about or really ruin someone's day. Right, next up we have Thorn. Also a very viable hand cannon at the minute, especially in PvP. PvE is not so bad either, especially with the unstoppable hand cannon perks so far. So with this in mind, I think I'm actually going to put this into B tier because it's quite viable at the minute. It does fair amounts of damage. It's a very good hand cannon to use in general. I don't see many flaws with it as well. It's got poison damage. What more could you want? So we're moving on to Thunderlord. I remember when this first came out, it was quite fun to use. It's not exactly viable because there's a lot of other weapons you can use in a heavy slot that will just override this in every single avenue that you can think of. If you want ad clear, there's a better heavy that can do it. Case in point would be Galahorn. If you want to do more DPS, pick any exotic. It will do more damage than Thunderlord. Except for the really, really bad one. So don't be literally on that. The reality of it is fun to start with. But there's no utility for it anymore. I don't see any purpose for it. So I'm somewhere in the middle of these two. I think I'll have to just ask Banshee for a refund on that one, to be honest. Next up, we have the Tractor Cannon, the next best thing to Divinity in terms of debuffs, and also at the same time it is the Titan's best friend with their solar builds. If you don't know, then just use solar hammers, Tractor Cannon, 1-2 punch, boom, you're doing massive damage. Until Bungie fixes that, of course. I can honestly see this being fairly viable, but it's again only in certain situations or when you're doing these cheese kind of broken builds in a way. So in my perspective, I see this more as a fun gun more than anything because it's used to break the boundaries rather than, obviously, you know, in an end game raid content. You don't use the tractor cannon, you use Divinity, you use Heather, something more viable like that. So I have to put the tractor cannon into the fun gun category. Trinity Ghoul, very, very viable bow that is used in both PvE and PvP alike. I don't see many flaws with this. It's a very good exotic bow for what it is. I'd hold it in the same regard as Le Monarque, so I'm going to put it into B tier with Le Monarque. Next up we have the Truth Teller. I will be honest, there are so many rocket launchers that are different that you could just use. I would just refund that. Two-Tailed Fox, again, there's a lot more very viable rocket launchers, but the Two-Tailed Fox for me is quite unique for the fact of it shoots two types of elemental rockets, and that in itself is quite useful. I know Gjallarhorn does the same, obviously, with its solar and arc, but this one does void and solar. So I've always been a fan of the Two-Tailed Fox, and for that reason, I think I will have to place this into C tier. There's a lot in C tier that I'm looking at it, but yeah, Two-Tailed Fox, C tier. Vigilance Wing, for when everything is not going your way in PvP and you just want one kill. I'm not gonna lie, I'll hold my hands up, I've used Vigilance Wing a few times. It is okay, but the exotic slot could be used for so many different weapons that you're better off just not using it at all. For endgame PvE content or even mid-game PvE content, it's not really viable. There are, again, other pulses you can use which will kick out more damage or will do better than Vigilance Wing. And it frees up your exotic slot if you're not using it. But despite that, it is usable in some circumstances, so I will be throwing this into D tier. Next we have this Trace Rifle. Again, I don't know what this one is called. I think this is the Void one off the top of my head. But for me, again, exotic Trace Rifle, it belongs in the fun gun category for momentum control. Whisperer of the Worm, one of the OG damaged sniper rifles. Now, I've got an honest admission for this. I don't really use Whisperer of the Worm at all. I tend to lean towards more Izanagi, if anything. But I do know that it's perked to reload one in the chamber when you fired up, I think it's 3 successful shots, is very good to have. But saying that, I'm pretty sure Izanagi actually does a bit more damage, so I'm happy to put Whisper of the Worm into B tier, because it's quite viable, but at the same time, I think Izanagi does that slight bit better. Wish Ender, I'll be brutally honest, the only time you're really going to use Wish Ender is for 2 reasons. 1, if you're messing around, and 2, if you're doing the quest where you've got to like hunt down all the Riven Eggs. Yeah, for me, I have to put in D tier. Worldline Zero, unless you're going to be Azuma, there's no reason for this weapon, so it's going to have to go into the... I know it's a sword, but it'll go into the fun gun category. Xenophage, a very viable and fairly easy to obtain exotic damage weapon, so with that in regards, it's like the amount of utility you can have with Xenophage is quite nice. You can use it for general ad clear, you can use it for certain circumstances, like when you're doing VOG and you have to do the oracles, Xenophage one-shots them, so it's perfect for taking out oracles. If you're just starting out doing raids or you're doing a dungeon, Xenophage is a fantastic starter weapon for just the basic DPS, not aiming for the high stuff. And not to mention, if you use Xenophage in Gambit, it's normally a 2-shot, and if you use it in PvP, I imagine it's a 2-shot as well, so it's fairly decent all round. I am very happy to put this into B tier. Now then, Bastion. A lot of uses for what it can be used for. It's not used as much as it used to be though. I do occasionally see it in PvP, and I do see it every now and again in PvE. It can be quite good at taking out strong ads like orange bars, or maybe just popping around the corner with a Bastion quickly in PvP and one-bursting someone and getting out of there. For that reason, with it not being that much utility, I'll have to drop this into C tier. Devil's Ruin, honestly, I've seen a few people use this. It's a bit ridiculous at what this can do. Basically, for those who aren't in the know, Devil Ruin, you can charge up the burst and it can essentially kill a Guardian in one burst. And the burst happens in like, I think 3 or 4 seconds. And it's a full clip as well, so it does strike me as a fun gun, I'm not going to lie. Symmetry, I'll be honest, I've never had a use for this. I would just refund it straight to Banshee. I'm sorry if it's upsetting anybody, but that's just how I see it. Fourth Horseman, I don't see anybody really use this anymore. I know what it can do, it's just I don't see any applications for it at all. I'm not going to be vain enough to say asking Banshee for a refund, but I don't see it being viable, so D tier, I will put that in. Tommy's Matchbook, despite the fact that it's still not used much, it's fairly viable in what it can do. So I would say if you were to get this quite early on, it would work quite well as an early ad clear weapon. but it doesn't really have much utility outside of that. I very rarely see anybody use it in endgame PvE. It's become quite a scarce weapon, but I know a lot of people can get it. I'll have to put this into D tier. Heir Apparent, this used to be an absolute monster in PvP. It used to be, you'd get power armor, all of a sudden you have this huge overshield that no one can break through. You're just mowing down everybody you see. Even if you didn't have like many bullets for it, you could just spool the cannon up and the overshield would proc, so it distract them. So it was so viable back then. But ever since the nerf, not so much. I don't see many people use it anymore. But I think out of respect for what it's accomplished in the past, I'll have to put this into C tier. Because despite the fact that it's actually been nerfed with its shield, it's still okay to use regardless. Traveler's Chosen, I remember this being quite viable when the utility startup mods were being utilised a lot. This was before Bungie implemented the new cooldown system we have for abilities, and I remember this used to be the sidearm to go to for a lot of people. It is fairly good in what it can do, and its ability isn't that bad as well. It can refresh your abilities with the kills you get. I'd happily put this into C tier for what it does. Now then, Witherhoard. Arguably one of my favourite guns in all of Destiny, so I will be a bit biased for this. Endgame PvE, it is fantastic for wiping out ads. It is also very good for tick damage. I think it might even rival like Anarchy in terms of how much tick damage it can kick out now. PvP, I love using it. It's fantastic for pushing people off point. It's brilliant for catching people off guard and getting the odd kill here or there. Gambit is the same situation. It can do ad clear and suppress the invader when they come across, or if I'm going across to them, I can also suppress them with Witherhoard as well, so it works both ways. For that, I would actually happily put Witherhoard into A tier. It is, without a doubt, one of the best weapons I use at the moment. Next we have Ruinous Effergy. This is a void rocket launcher, and the only reason I explain that is because I don't see anybody using this. With that being said, despite it being a rocket launcher, you have to ask Banshee for a refund. I don't see anyone using it. Its damage isn't that good. You have many different alternatives you can use. Cloud Stride. Now this is an interesting one. For PvE, it's okay. For PvP, if you can get the headshots off consistently, this is a deadly weapon because it does wipe out multiple people with a lightning bolt if you get a headshot. But unfortunately for me, I am quite crap with sniper rifles, but I'm not going to shy away and saying that's going to be the reason why I'm going to move it down. I will happily put this into B tier because I know Cloud Strike is a very viable sniper rifle to be using. Duality, I don't see anyone use this. There's so many shotgun alternatives you can use. Case in point, Chaperone, that's on the list. There's also Fellwinter's Lie. There's obviously the Heritages. There's so many shotguns out in the whole PvP scape at the minute. Any legendary would do better than Duality at this point, so just refund it if I'm honest with you. Eyes of Tomorrow used to be the bane of my existence in Gambit, without a shadow of a doubt. And even to this day, it is the only raid exotic I do not have. So I am quite miffed with Eyes of Tomorrow. I know it's a very good rocket launcher. It's sad that it doesn't do the maximum potential damage it could do. And what I mean by that is it does reduce damage to bosses when it could do a lot more damage. If it did so much more damage, I would put this so high up on the list because it would be like a go-to rocket launcher. But because of that boss damage nerf, it doesn't rank as high in my eyes. It's still a very good rocket launcher regardless, so by all means if you get this when you run Deep Stone Crit, feel free to use it. It is a fairly decent weapon. I would happily put this into C tier. Next up we have No Time to Explain. Now this was an absolute behemoth of a pulse rifle when it first came out in Beyond Light. There was not a great deal of weapons that could actually stand up to it, and it's still quite usable today. I remember I was doing trials last night and there was a few people who were using No Time to Explain, and my lord does it do a lot of damage. I think they were actually killing us in 2 bursts, and that's not normally the case. It's normally 2 and a little bit of a burst. So getting killed outright by 2 bursts means the primaries must have got buffed along with No Time to Explain. It's definitely worth giving it a go because in PvP it's fantastic. It's not so bad in PvE. I wouldn't recommend it for end game PvE, but low to mid tier, go for it. It's fairly viable to use. It's not a bad pulse rifle at all. I will happily put this into C tier. Next we have Salvation's Grip. I like the utility it had when you had the mission for it. It just has no other purpose in the game, which is a really disappointing thing. But saying that, the only thing I could see you using this for is if you were trying to get out of bounds on a map for whatever reason, and you needed to build platforms. This is why this comes in. So with that in mind, it would be a fun gun. Lament, also known as the Chainsaw Sword. That's a very strange thing to call it, but we'll go with it. Not gonna lie, when this first came out with Beyond Light, it was an absolute monster. It did a ridiculous amount of damage, and it was the go-to power weapon for a while. obviously alongside Anarchy, because that was back when Anarchy was doing full tick damage to bosses, so both of them were very viable. But despite that, and despite numerous nerfs, the Lament is still very powerful as a sword. And it's still one of my favourite swords at the minute, so I am very happy to put this into B tier, just because of the sheer damage it does, and also the fact that it does actually turn into an anti-barrier weapon when you rev it up, which is like an added bonus. Hawkmoon, I know this is quite a good weapon in PvP. In PvE, it can be okay, but only if you charge it up prior with previous kills. Apart from that, I don't see it being very viable, so with that in mind, it is going to a C rank. Deadman's Tail is like a staple in PvP at the minute. Everybody's using it, everybody's got one. PvE, not so much. People do use it. I use it every now and again because it is fairly good as a scout rifle. Again, I'm happy to put this in C tier along with Hawkmoon. It's not fantastic, it's not bad. Tiku's Divination, I don't use this bow personally, but I know one of my mates uses it fairly frequently. To me, it's not anything groundbreaking, it's not an amazing bow. It is good at what it specifically does, which is you'll shoot one arrow, then the second arrow is detonate them. So I'd say if anything, it'd be good for ad clear. It can be good in PvP if you are good with shooting bows. But for me personally, I'm no good with it, and I have no idea how to use it properly, so I'd have to put this into D tier. Cryesthesia, I never see anybody use this, so just literally get a refund from Banshee. Vexmitha class, it used to be a very, very viable and good weapon, especially with particle deconstruction. Now, it's still used a fair bit, and it still hits very hard in PvP. You don't particularly see it very often in PvE anymore. It is fairly good and still quite viable to use, but the fact that it's locked behind a raid makes it a lot more frustrating for a lot of players. And I have seen this frustration firsthand by a lot of the community, but I don't think this is actually as good as many people make it out to be. There's been a lot of occasions in PvP where I've been able to outdo a Vexmitha class with a pulse rifle, or maybe even a hand cannon every now and again. With that regard on how hard it is to actually get it to begin with, and then the fact that it's not that good in my eyes, I'd have to put this at C tier at the highest. Lorenz Driver, an absolute nightmare to deal with in PvP, especially if someone is using a controller, because they have aim assist, which basically means you are going to die. Especially if someone is standing next to you, they are going to die as well. An absolute bane in my eyes, but I know for a fact this is a good gun. It's okay for ad clear, so I have no problem. Again, I tell you what, no, I was going to say I'd put this as a C tier. I think I'm going to put this into B tier. It's just because it's actually not that bad of a linear fusion rifle in general. It's good with ad clear, it does a fair bit of damage regardless, so orange bars aren't really a problem. It's good in PvP, and it's a nightmare to deal with if they use a controller. Why not? Aegis Scepter, the other trace rifle, that is the stasis one. This came out in Season of the Lost. I would again put this in Fun Gun. I don't ever use trace rifles unless it's for momentum control. Now then, the Forerunner. This was a very interesting entry that came out with Bungie's 30th anniversary. I really like the Forerunner, basically on its design and the fact that it's a sidearm that hits like a hand cannon. It's a really odd concept for a weapon in my eyes, but I love it because it's like a throwback to the old Halo games, like when I was little. And I remember in Halo 1, the Magnum used to be my favourite weapon, so it's really nice to see Destiny have an addition to this, and I'm really happy Bungie did add something like this. In terms of utility, PvE wise, you don't see it used very often. PvP, weirdly enough though, some people do use it as a backup, and it does work very well. But I think for the nostalgia value and the fact that you can use it in generally anything and it would be okay, I'd have to put this into C tier. I don't see this being as bad as D tier, and I don't see it being good enough for B tier, unfortunately. The Gjallarhorn, probably one of the best ad clear weapons at the moment in the entire game. It does suck a bit that it is locked behind the Grasp of Avarice dungeon. It's not as accessible as you think it would be, which does make me a bit sad because I think a lot of players should have this weapon because it's just one of the best rocket launchers in the game. For me, Gjallarhorn, I'd have to put this on A tier. It is a very good rocket launcher. Damage wise, it's very good. Ad clear, it smashes everything. It can do no wrong. Right, we're actually getting close to the end. But next we have the Dead Messenger, which is the new waveform grenade launcher that you can get from the Vox Populi mission. I swear I butchered that name, but I'm moving on. This isn't actually that bad of a grenade launcher. The catalyst is a bit of a nightmare to do, but I suppose it comes with, if you enjoy it enough, you'll just get it naturally. The Dead Messenger itself, though, is actually very good for ad clear. Boss damage, not really. PvP, there's a lot better alternatives you can use. I'd say this probably comfortably sits into C tier. Now then, the glaives. For the glaives, I'm going to class them all as the same thing because whilst they do wildly different stuff, I feel like they should just be classed as one rather than their own separate things. And if I'm being completely honest, I have not unlocked any of the glaives, but from the feedback that I've been hearing throughout the majority of the community is they are not what they are hyped up to be. The Enigma glaive that you get originally is actually better in some situations. The best way to think of it is the glaive stays exactly the same, but instead of having the void shot that you get on the Enigma, you have an ability, or for the hunters you have the lightning arc thing, which isn't going to be that great. You can use something that's exotic in a better slot. So with that in mind, I am going to put all 3 glaives into D tier because they are not really that viable to use. Grand Overture. This was actually a machine gun I had very high hopes for, and I have to say I am a little bit disappointed because when it was advertised in the trailers, it was a short burst of like shells going out from it. When I found out that that is ability and it's not actually its rate of fire, I was really disappointed because I felt like Bungie could have done something special. But saying that, I won't take too much away from it. I still love the fact that you can do the massive burst on it, but I just don't see it being viable in any game mode whatsoever. So I'll have to resort to putting this as a fun gun. Osteo Striga. Now this is an interesting one because the Osteo Striga is probably the best SMG that you can get at the moment, with the odd exceptions of a few god rolls here and there. The Osteo Striga's perk that can spawn a poison pool when you kill an ad is fantastic for ad clear. It's probably the best up there. And a very nice bonus that we found out when we was doing Caretaker on day 1 in Valor the Disciple. This actually does quite a lot of tick damage, so it's actually viable to use against bosses, which is weird enough. So we're considering the fact that you can actually do a fair bit of damage to bosses, and it's fantastic for ad clear. I think the Osteo Striga definitely earns a place on A rank. I am tempted to bump it up to S rank. As a matter of fact, actually, I think I will bump it up to S rank because the Osteo Striga has so many applications on the low level end of PvE and the high end of PvE. You can use it in PvP, you can use it in Gambit, you can literally use it anywhere and it will be quite good for what it is. Last 2, we have the Parasite Grenade Launcher. Now, I quite like the Parasite Grenade Launcher, and it does a hell of a lot of damage considering it's a grenade launcher. I think the highest numbers I've seen in one shot is 300k. But I couldn't be wrong, and you could do significantly more, but that is just what I've seen. Having said that, I don't see it being very viable near enough anywhere. It's a fun gun to use. I'll have to class it as a fun gun. Now the final weapon, the new raid exotic, also known as the Collective Obligation. I have mixed opinions about this because it's a pulse rifle, it has a fair amount of rate of fire. Its ability is quite interesting in that it can eat buffs and debuffs and then reapply them, obviously the void debuffs only. In my eyes, I don't see where this is going to be very applicable. I don't see anybody use it in Crucible. I don't see anyone use it in PvE. I don't see anyone use it in Gambit. It just doesn't seem that viable. It seems a gun that you would just use because you're curious or you want to give it a go. I don't think it's bad enough to put it into D tier because you can still use it for a few things. We've got the Unstoppable Pulse Rifle, so you can give it a whirl if you want. Not to mention it will apply the debuffs and buffs, so it can be used for something. I just don't think we've used it enough to understand what it does properly, so I'll happily put this into C tier. But that is a wrap, I'm afraid. This is the final finish list of what we've got, so I'm only going to go over the top few. We've got Divinity and Osteo Striga at S tier, then we have Ace of Spades, Izanagi, Sleeper Stimulant, Witherhoard and Galahorn as A tier. B tier we have Deathbringer, La Monarque, 1000 Voices, Outbreak Perfected, Telesto, Thorn, Trinity Ghoul, Whisper of the Worm, Xenophage, Cloudstrike, Lament, and Lorenz Driver. The rest of them obviously you can guess because they're there. But if you would like to give this a go yourself, by all means, the link is in the description for you to give it a go and do your own. But this is just my perspective on the Destiny 2 exotics we have in the game right now. There is a lot of variety in the exotics we currently have, which lets you make some really unique things. But like I said, thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.